My engine died in a storm, but it was the man under the hood who truly stopped my heart. Tyler was a grumpy mechanic with grease on his hands and scars on his soul, or so I thought. I fell for a lie, never realizing he was the world's most powerful billionaire heir. Now, the truth is out, and there's no turning back. The steam rising from the hood of my vintage convertible was a perfect metaphor for my life. A total, irreversible wreck. I was 300 miles from the suffocating, glass and steel skyscrapers of New York, fleeing a career that had slowly drained my spirit and a fiancé who viewed me as nothing more than a strategic asset on a merger document. My father had arranged my life like a cold balance sheet, and I was finally running toward a blank page. Then the engine groaned one last time. The sky opened up in a violent, gray downpour, and I was stranded on a muddy dirt road in a forgotten town called Oakhaven. I managed to coast into a small, weathered garage that looked like it was held together by rust, ivy, and prayers. The sign outside swung precariously in the wind, groaning on its hinges. "Hello!" I called out, the rain soaking through my silk blouse in seconds, making the fabric cling to my skin. The only answer was the rhythmic, heavy clank of metal against metal coming from beneath a massive, mud-caked truck. A pair of heavy, oil-stained work boots slid out from under the chassis, followed by a man who looked like he had been carved from the very mountain itself. He was huge, his broad shoulders stretching the limits of a navy jumpsuit. His face was smudged with grease, but his eyes, a piercing, stormy gray, cut through the dim light of the shop with a coldness that made the freezing rain feel warm. "You're trespassing," he growled, his voice a low, rough rumble that vibrated deep in my chest. He didn't even bother to stand up. He just stared at me like I was a particularly annoying bug he wanted to swat away. "My car died," I snapped, my fear turning into defensive pride. "I need a mechanic, not a lecture on property rights or hospitality." He wiped his hands on a filthy rag, his gaze raking over my expensive heels and tailored trousers with blatant, unapologetic disapproval. "I don't fix fancy city cars, princess, and I definitely don't fix them in the middle of a flood. Try the next town over." "The next town is 20 miles away," I cried, the first tear of frustration finally breaking through my composure. "Please, I have nowhere else to go, I'm freezing, and my car won't budge." He looked at the sheets of rain outside, then back at me. For a fleeting second, the grumpiness flickered, replaced by something dangerously close to reluctant sympathy. "Fine," he muttered, tossing the rag onto a cluttered workbench. "But you're staying in the loft, and you're staying out of my way while I work." Tyler didn't speak more than 10 words to me over the next 2 days. He was a man of shadows and heavy, intentional silence, moving through the garage with a rugged grace that didn't match his calloused exterior. While he worked on my engine, I watched him from the loft stairs, my chin resting on my knees. I watched the way his muscles rippled beneath the jumpsuit when he turned a heavy wrench, the way he focused so intently on the machinery that the rest of the world seemed to cease to exist. He was a mystery wrapped in denim, and grease, and I found myself increasingly curious about the man behind the scowl. The loft above the garage was sparse but clean, smelling of aged cedar and motor oil. On the third night, the power went out, plunging the world into a deep, velvety black. I climbed down the wooden ladder to find Tyler sitting by a small wood stove, a single candle illuminating the sharp, masculine angles of his face. He was shirtless, and for the first time I saw the scars, thick, jagged lines across his back and shoulders that spoke of a violence or a tragedy I couldn't imagine. "What happened to you?" I whispered, standing in the shadows of the workshop, my heart aching at the sight. He didn't turn around, but his massive shoulders tensed. "Life happened, Diane. Not everyone gets to live in a glass tower where the air is filtered and the floors are heated marble." I sat across from him, the warmth of the stove a small comfort between us. "I ran away from a glass tower, Tyler. It's a lot lonelier than it looks from the street. You're surrounded by people, but no one actually sees you." He looked at me then, his gray eyes softening in the flickering firelight. "Why did you run? A girl like you usually has everything she wants handed to her on a silver platter." "Because I didn't want to be a part of a deal," I confessed, my voice barely audible over the crackling wood. "My father wanted me to marry for a corporate merger. I wanted to be seen as a person, not a payout. I wanted something real. Tyler let out a dry, bitter laugh that didn't reach his eyes. A person is just a deal with skin on it, Diane. Trust me on that. But as he spoke, his hand reached out, his rough, warm fingers brushing against my wrist. The spark wasn't mechanical, it was biological. It was a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity that made my breath hitch. He wasn't just a grumpy mechanic. He was a man who had been deeply hurt, and in that moment, I wanted to fix his spirit more than he wanted to fix my car. By the 5th day, the rain had finally stopped, leaving Oak Haven smelling of wet pine, fresh earth, and new beginnings. Despite my car being nearly ready, I found myself looking for excuses to stay in the dust and heat of the garage. I started helping him, handing him tools and cleaning the workbench. I was a disaster at first, dropping bolts into the chassis and confusing pliers for wrenches, but Tyler was surprisingly patient. He taught me the difference between a socket wrench and a spanner, his large, steady hands guiding mine with a gentleness that contradicted his gruff words. "You're not bad for a princess," he joked one afternoon, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his grimy exterior. It was a beautiful sight, like the sun finally coming out after a week of storms. My heart did a slow, dangerous roll in my chest, and I realized I was in deep trouble. "And you're not bad for a mountain man," I countered, reaching up with a daring confidence to wipe a smudge of grease off his high cheekbone. The air between us charged instantly, the atmosphere growing heavy. We were standing between a half-disassembled engine and a stack of old tires, but it felt like the center of the universe. Tyler leaned in, his scent, pine, gasoline, and pure, masculine heat overwhelming my senses. He didn't kiss me yet, though his gaze dropped to my lips. He just leaned his forehead against mine, his breathing heavy and ragged. "You should leave, Diane," he whispered, his voice a low warning that felt like a plea. "Before this becomes something you can't walk away from. I'm not who you think I am. I'm not a safe harbor." "Maybe I don't want to walk away," I replied, my voice a mere breath against his lips, my heart pounding against my ribs. He pulled back, a look of profound longing and fear in his eyes. He was a man hiding from the world, and for the first time, I realized that his grumpiness was just a shield, a suit of armor to keep people at a distance so they couldn't see the man underneath. He was protecting himself, and I was the first person who had actually climbed over his walls. But as he turned back to the car, I saw a flash of gold under his jumpsuit, a heavy, incredibly expensive watch that looked entirely out of place on a mechanic's wrist. I pushed the thought aside, choosing to believe in the man I saw, not the mystery he kept hidden. The tension finally snapped on the 7th night. A celebratory dinner for my almost fixed car, simple burgers and cheap beer, turned into a deep, soul-baring conversation that lasted until the stars were high and the crickets were loud. Tyler told me about his mother, a woman who had died young, leaving him with a father who valued power and profit over everything else. I told him about my dreams of opening a gallery, of a life where art mattered more than the numbers in a bank account or the prestige of a surname. "You deserve everything you want, Diane," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "You have a fire in you that this town could never put out." We moved toward the small, creaking bed in the loft, the world outside Oak Haven completely forgotten. The intimacy that followed was fierce and tender, a total, absolute surrender of the masks we both wore. When Tyler made love to me, it wasn't just physical, it was a promise. Every touch, every whispered word in the dark told me that he saw the real me, not the socialite, not the runaway, but the woman who had wandered into his shop. His hands, usually so rough and efficient with cold metal, were worshipful and gentle against my skin. In his arms, I felt like I had finally found the home I had been searching for in all the wrong cities and boardrooms. In the quiet aftermath, as I lay with my head on his broad chest, Tyler held me like I was the most precious thing he had ever owned. "I never thought I'd find someone like you in a place like this," he whispered into my hair, his heart beating a steady, reassuring rhythm against mine. "I didn't find you, Tyler," I replied, sleep pulling at my eyelids. "I found us, and I'm not letting go." I fell asleep believing I knew the man beside me. I believed in the grease-stained hands and the quiet life in the loft. But as the sun rose the next morning, the dream was shattered by the sound of crunching gravel. A fleet of black, sleek SUVs pulled into the driveway of the garage. Two men in expensive suits stepped out, looking like shadows from the world I had escaped. And when they spoke, my world collapsed. "Mr. Thorne," one of them said, bowing deeply toward the garage. "Your father is demanding your return to the board. The merger cannot wait any longer. We have the jet ready." I stood on the loft stairs, frozen in place, as Tyler walked out of the garage. He wasn't wearing his navy jumpsuit today. He was wearing a crisp, white button-down shirt I hadn't seen before, and his posture was no longer that of a weary, small-town mechanic. He looked like royalty. He looked like a billionaire. He looked like the very thing I had been running from. "Tyler," I whispered, my voice cracking with a pain I hadn't known was possible. He turned, and the stormy gray eyes that had looked at me with such tenderness the night before were now filled with a cold, calculated regret. "Diane, I was going to tell you today. I just needed one more night of being just a man. One more night of being the version of myself you loved." "Tell me what?" I demanded, descending the stairs, my heart shattering with every step. "That you're Tyler Thorne, the heir to the Thorne International fortune, the man who vanished from the news cycles and the corporate world 2 years ago." "I needed to get away," he said, stepping toward me, but I recoiled as if he had struck me. "I needed to know I could exist without the money, without the name that everyone wants a piece of. I thought I could stay here forever." "So you used me," I cried, the tears finally falling. "You played the role of the humble mechanic while I poured my heart out to you. While I told you I was running away from exactly the kind of man you are. Was any of it real, or was I just a convenient distraction?" "It wasn't a role," he yelled, his voice echoing through the empty garage. "The man you were with last night, that was me. The money doesn't change the way I feel about you, Diane." "It changes everything, Tyler," I screamed back, my voice raw. "You let me fall for a lie. You let me believe we were building something real in the dirt, but you're just another man who uses his power to manipulate the people around him." I walked past the suits and the SUVs, heading for my car. It was fixed. It was perfect. And it was the only thing I had left of the man I thought I loved. I drove out of Oakhaven without looking back, the grease on my hands the only evidence that any of it had ever happened. Returning to New York felt like walking back into a prison cell with gold bars. My father was ecstatic that I was back, and he immediately pushed for the merger with the Thorne family. Ironically, the very family Tyler belonged to. I sat through endless meetings, my heart a hollow stone in my chest. I saw Tyler's face in every business journal, heard his name in every boardroom whisper. He was no longer the grumpy mechanic. He was the prodigal son who had returned to take his throne and save the Thorne legacy. I tried to go back to my old life, but Oakhaven had changed me irrevocably. The smell of expensive perfume felt cloying and fake compared to the scent of cedar and oil. The rehearsed smiles of the elite felt like physical blows. One night, at a high-profile gala intended to celebrate the coming merger, I found myself cornered by my ex-fiancé, who was looking smugger than ever. "You look different, Diane," he sneered, gripping my arm too tightly for comfort. "Did you find what you were looking for out in the dirt? Or did you finally realize you belong here with us, playing the game?" I was about to snap back, to tell him exactly where he could go, when a hand landed on his shoulder. A large, powerful hand with faint, fatting scars on the knuckles. A hand I knew better than my own. "She belongs wherever she chooses to be," a familiar, low voice growled. I turned to see Tyler. He was in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than his entire garage back in Oakhaven, but his eyes were still the same stormy, protective gray. He looked at me with a longing so intense it made my knees weak. "Let her go," he told my ex, his voice containing a lethal authority that made the other man stumble back in fear. Tyler looked at me, ignoring the gasps and the whispers of the surrounding crowd. "We need to talk, Diane, not as Thorne and Sterling, but as Tyler and Diane, the mechanic and the artist." We ended up on the rooftop terrace of the hotel, the city lights of Manhattan spread out like a carpet of diamonds below us. It was a world away from the wood stove in Oakhaven, but the tension between us was exactly the same, thick, electric and undeniable. "I didn't come back for the board or the money," Tyler said, leaning against the marble railing, the wind ruffling his hair. "I came back for you. I realized that if I wanted to protect you from people like your father and mine, I needed the power I had spent my life running away from." "You could have told me the truth," I whispered, my anger finally giving way to a crushing, heavy sadness. "I would have understood, but you let me believe you were someone else entirely. You let me love a phantom." "I was someone else," he argued, turning to face me. "In that garage, I was the man I actually wanted to be. With you, I was free. But I saw your father's men hunting for you. I knew they were going to find you and drag you back to that forced marriage. I had to step back into this world to stop them legally. I bought out your father's debt, Diane. You're free. The merger is dead. You don't have to marry anyone to save your family." I stared at him, stunned, the magnitude of his move hitting me. "You did what?" "I used the Thorne name to kill the Sterling merger. You can open your gallery now. You can go anywhere in the world. You don't owe anyone anything." He stepped closer, his scent still the same even under the expensive cologne. "I didn't lie to use you. I lied to keep the world away from us for just a little longer. I wanted to see if you could love a man without a bank account." "But what about us?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There is no us unless you want there to be," he said, his voice raw and honest. "I'm still the grumpy man who doesn't like city cars. I'm just a grumpy man who can now make sure no one ever hurts you again. If you walk away now, you walk away a free woman. That was my only goal. I'd rather you be free and hate me than trapped and needing me." The news of the Thorne Sterling debt buyout hit the press the next morning like a physical explosion. The headlines were scandalous and relentless. Thorne heir saves rival's daughter and the billion-dollar love affair. My father was furious at the loss of control over me, but he was legally powerless. Tyler had played the corporate game better than anyone, effectively cutting off every avenue of manipulation my family had over my life. But the media attention was a different kind of prison. Paparazzi followed me everywhere, and the princess and the mechanic story became a national obsession. I felt like a bird in a new, more expensive cage. I went to Tyler's penthouse, a glass palace in the sky, to find him looking out at the city he now commanded. "Is this what it's going to be like forever?" I asked, looking at the flashing lights of the cameras down on the street 40 stories below. "It doesn't have to be," Tyler said, turning to me. He looked tired, the weight of the crown clearly heavy on his broad shoulders. "I have a proposal for the board. I'm stepping down as CEO. I'm turning the company into a trust for the employees with a professional management team." "Tyler, you can't give up your entire legacy for me," I said, stepping into his personal space, seeing the sacrifice he was making. "I'm not giving up everything," he smiled, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "I'm giving up the things that don't matter so I can keep the only thing that does. I've bought the land in Oakhaven, all of it. I want to build a studio there for you, and maybe I'll keep the garage open for the neighbors who actually need their trucks fixed." "You'd really go back?" I asked, my heart beginning to hope for the first time in months. "I'd go anywhere," he vowed, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that burned. "As long as you're there to hand me the wrenches when I get stuck. That's the only board meeting I care about attending." The final board meeting of Thorne International was a spectacle that the city would talk about for decades. Tyler walked into that boardroom and systematically dismantled the Thorne dynasty's hold on his life. He gave his father a final look of cold, quiet indifference and walked out, a free man for the second time in his life. But this time, he wasn't running away from his responsibilities. He was walking toward his future. He met me at the entrance of the building, where a massive crowd of reporters and photographers had gathered. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the stock price or the scandal or the flashing bulbs. He knelt on the sidewalk, right there in the middle of Wall Street, and pulled out a small box. Inside wasn't a diamond the size of a grape. It was a simple, elegant silver band with a tiny, intricate gear etched into the center. "Diane Sterling," he said, his voice projecting with the strength of a man who finally knew exactly who he was and what he wanted. "I am a grumpy, difficult man who prefers grease to gold. I am a man with scars and a past I'm still healing from. But I am a man who loves you more than life itself. Will you join me in Oakhaven? Will you be my partner in art, in mechanics, and in everything in between? The crowd went silent. The city seemed to hold its breath. I looked at the man who had lied to save me, the man who had surrendered a kingdom just to ensure I had a choice. I saw the mechanic, the billionaire, and the man who had held me in the loft. Yes, I whispered, then louder so everyone could hear. Yes, Tyler, always yes. We kissed, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a prize, a trophy, or a strategic asset. I felt like an equal. The billionaire had become the mechanic, and the socialite had become the artist, and together we were finally going home to the only place that felt real. 1 year later, Oak Haven was a different place, though the air still smelled of wet pine, motor oil, and possibilities. The old garage was still there, but it was now part of a larger, beautiful complex that included a stunning, sun-drenched art gallery where my first exhibition was currently being held. We lived in a house we built together, a mix of modern glass and rustic timber that perfectly reflected the two worlds we had merged. I walked into the shop one afternoon to find Tyler under a vintage convertible, the same one that had broken down a year ago. He was covered in grease, his brow furrowed in deep concentration as he tinkered with the engine. "How's it coming, mechanic?" I asked, leaning against the workbench with a smile, holding 2 cups of coffee. He slid out from under the car, a wide grin on his face that reached his gray eyes. "She's purring like a kitten, Diane. Better than the day she was rolled off the assembly line." He stood up, wiping his hands on a familiar rag before pulling me into a kiss that tasted like home and forever. "You know," I whispered, looking around at the life we had built, "I still can't believe the grumpy mechanic who tried to kick me out is the same man who bought my first gallery space." "I'm still that guy," he laughed, holding me close, his arms strong and steady. "I just have better tools and a much better reason to get up in the morning." We stood in the doorway of our garage, watching the sun set over the rolling hills of Oak Haven. We had escaped the towers and the deals, finding a love that was built on truth, calloused hands, and a broken engine. The billionaire had found his peace in the dirt, and I had found my person in the man beneath the hood. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in Oak Haven, that was the greatest fortune of all. Did Tyler do the right thing by buying out Diane's debt without telling her, or was it just another way of controlling her life? I want to hear your take in the comments. If you loved this hidden billionaire romance, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional stories every day.